Hello, and welcome to the DCBS Panelist Guide to Effective and Inclusive Interviews. In this course, we'll be discussing ways to make our interview process here at DCBS both effective and inclusive. We'll take a look at why we use panel interviews, how unconscious bias plays a part in the interview setting, the expectations and best practices for panel interviews, and offer some resources and tools to take with you. Congratulations on becoming an integral part of the hiring process at DCBS. DCBS holds panel interviews as opposed to individual interviews. This practice allows us to demonstrate who we are as an agency while gathering multiple perspectives of the candidates and what they can contribute to the position, the agency, and the community. Panel interviews are advantageous over interviewing one-on-one. Even an experienced interviewer can miss vital information or be misled by personal biases. The best check against this is to compare conclusions with other interviewers. To the extent possible, members of an interview panel should be diverse and composed of individuals with various working relationships and interactions with the available position. If a candidate requests a list of interview panel members, the hiring manager may provide this information. If a candidate makes a legitimate request that a particular panel member not be present during the interview, the hiring manager can honor that request. There are many reasons why diversity is important, but in terms of the interview process, it's important for us to not only represent our inclusion and perspectives, but it's also important for a candidate to see how they are and would be represented within DCBS. Having a partnership with all staff, regardless of position or background, will help ensure that an interview is experienced from multiple perspectives. How we see the world is developed throughout our lifetime, starting with intrinsic values such as age, race, ethnicity, and gender. This viewpoint is further shaped by extrinsic factors like where we grew up, what we look like, what we do for work and fun, our educational experiences, and our personal beliefs and habits. When it comes to how we see things within a workplace, factors like work location, division, work function, tenure, and management status can greatly change how we perceive what's happening around us. As an interview panel member, you bring valuable and unique insights when it comes to evaluating objective criteria during an interview. But just as your different lenses help shape the world around you, hidden within all of them are levels of unconscious and implicit bias. Let's take a look at how these biases may affect the interview process. Let's take a look at different types of biases that could be present during the interview process. The first impression bias, the tendency of an interviewer to make snap judgments about a job candidate within seconds of meeting them. Affinity bias, also known as similarity bias, is the tendency to want to work with someone who is like us culturally, someone we like, and someone we can see ourselves socializing with. Stereotype bias occurs when the interviewer assumes a candidate has specific traits because they are a member of a certain group. Prototype bias is based on what the interviewer has seen succeed in the role in the past and allows that to shape who they believe will be successful in that role in the future. Confirmation bias happens when we have an initial perception about a candidate, and then we look for and focus on information that supports that initial belief. Contrast bias occurs when an interviewer inappropriately compares candidates to another single candidate. Nonverbal behavior bias is placing undue emphasis on things that have nothing to do with the candidate's ability to do the job, many of which are culturally determined. Examples include volume and rate of speech, eye contact, firmness of handshake, or whether a candidate has visible tattoos and/or piercings. Gender bias is the influence of gender on our assessment of the candidate's ability to successfully perform the job, including a tendency to rate men higher than equally qualified women. Race bias is the tendency to treat minority candidates differently in interviews and assess them as less competent when the same qualifications are present. The personal discomfort bias is the tendency to allow personal discomfort with a candidate to influence the interviewer's behavior in the interview and in the assessment of that candidate. Unconscious bias refers to a bias that we are unaware of and which happens outside of our control. It is a bias that happens automatically and is triggered by our brain making quick judgments and assessments of people and situations influenced by our background, cultural environment, and personal experiences. Implicit bias refers to the same area but questions the level to which these biases are unconscious, especially as we are being made increasingly aware of them. Once we know that biases are not always explicit, we are responsible for them. We all need to recognize and acknowledge our biases and find ways to mitigate their impact on our behavior and decisions. Stereotypes can influence our perception of who's the right fit. They may create a roadblock towards our destination. So how do we overcome this bias? Set objective criteria. This can help prevent you from being swayed by irrelevant factors. Establish clear criteria when making decisions. What needs to be done in this position? What are the basic requirements for this position? What is the number one most important attribute a candidate must have in order to be successful in this position? Are you willing to invest in professional development, or are you looking for an out-of-the-box professional? Share the why behind your decisions. This will help you double-check your objectivity and allow you and others to identify if a bias is narrowing the scope of your decision-making. Don't make assumptions based solely on the idea of a right fit. Make decisions based on examining skills and supportable objective criteria. You've no doubt heard the saying, the right fit for the job. And although that saying does lend itself to finding matches in skill sets, it also invites the opportunity for bias, as it allows you to fill the gaps of what a person with those skills may look, sound, or act like to fit into that role. This can be dangerous, as it could lead us to making decisions based on what we assume and not based on examining skills and supportable criteria. Ensuring an inclusive, open interview environment takes a conscious effort. Two factors that can make the biggest difference is maintaining transparency and consistency within your interview process. Transparency is essential to building a fair and equitable hiring process. In terms of the interview, having a position description, knowledge of what the position requires, and honest representation of the expectations of that position are very important. After all, the interview isn't just for the hiring panel, it's for the candidate to learn more and decide whether the position, team, agency, and culture is something that they wish to contribute to as well. Consistency creates equal opportunities for all candidates under consideration. If additional materials, such as portfolios or presentations, will be considered, ensure that the candidates have a list of acceptable items and have a way to submit them. Have the same question set for every interview, so all candidates have the opportunity to offer comparable examples of skills and experience. If you are going to limit the time of any portion of the interview, make sure that the time limit is strictly enforced. Specific follow-up questions for clarification are encouraged, but ensure that all candidates have the time to address the core questions provided to every candidate. These steps will help ensure the same equal experience for every candidate. Now that we have some tools about mitigating bias in the interview process, let's take a look at how to be successful as a panel member. When you are a part of an interview panel, there are a few things to take into consideration. You are there to help provide insight to the hiring manager on how the candidate's qualifications match those needed for the position. Ultimately, the hiring manager will consider all information and observations presented to help make their decision. Please keep your conversations and all written notes and records confidential within the interview panel team. There are 3 aspects to setting up successful interviews in order to find the best for DCBS: preparation, conducting the interview, and legal considerations. Let's take a look at each of these elements, starting with how to successfully prepare for the interview. Communication is key when preparing for an interview. It is every panel member's responsibility to understand their role within the interview process. Knowing what is expected of you as an interview panelist is essential for a successful and equitable interview. A pre-interview meeting should be scheduled with all panel members to establish clear criteria, interview questions, and logistics. This meeting should cover the position description, interview questions, additional considerations, expectations, and other applicable information as needed. The hiring manager may request that you use a specific document to capture your thoughts on the candidate. Please be aware that all written notes taken during an interview session are subject to public records. Please keep your observations objective and how the qualifications match the job description. Interviews tend to run more smoothly when a facilitator provides direction to the panelists and the candidates. This may include meeting and/or briefing the panel members, keeping records of any group discussions and feedback, leading introductions during the interview, escorting the candidate in and out of the room, and ensuring proper procedure and decorum are followed. If accommodations have been requested for a candidate, the facilitator is responsible for making sure the interview environment is accessible and inclusive. A facilitator can also serve a dual role as a panel member, or simply facilitate the process. Panel members should arrive at least 15 minutes prior to any interview to receive any last-minute details, briefings, and instructions. Please ensure to attend meetings to discuss objectives, assign questions to panelists, and have a plan on how the interview will flow. Let's take a closer look at how to successfully conduct the interview. Be welcoming. The lead panel member will invite the candidate to take a seat and offer an overview of how the interview will flow, how the questions will be asked, and if there are any specific time frames to adhere to. Introduce yourself and remember to be polite and respectful at all times. As a panel member, you represent the state and our agency. Please conduct yourself in an inclusive and open manner. So often, we listen in order to respond. But in interviews, it's imperative that we are making a conscious effort to listen for understanding. Here at DCBS, we have a language entirely our own in terms of acronyms and division-specific jargon. So a best practice is to listen for the intent, not words. Whether it's different language, different region, or a different industry, our words often take on different meanings given a specific audience. So make sure you're asking for clarification if the candidate uses a term you're not familiar with, and do not make decisions based on an accent or word choices. The hiring manager has carefully selected questions based on the position, which will allow them to determine how the candidate's qualifications can be applied to the open position. While you are encouraged to ask clarifying questions to better understand the candidate's response, please ensure that you are allowing enough time for all questions to be addressed and allowing the candidate to do most of the talking. Interviewing virtually is a great way to be inclusive and accessible, but it can bring a set of unique challenges. Here are some things to be aware of when you are part of a virtual interview panel. Regardless of whether you are in a conference room with other people or signed into a meeting separately, make sure that you have access to a camera so that the candidate can see you, and be aware that you are on camera at all times. It can be difficult to know when to look into the monitor as opposed to looking into the camera. Therefore, please make a mindful effort to look directly into the webcam periodically to help establish a connection with the candidate. Also, be aware of what's in your background. What can others see? Pets, partners, kids, reflections in mirrors? All of these factors can affect the interview process in terms of distractions. Carefully consider clothing choice. Selecting contrasting colors to your skin tone will help those with vision issues better see you. This is especially important if you are using a virtual background. Pull up all paperwork on the screen and organize your desktop so that you can see reference materials without having to look away from the camera. Remember that all written notes taken during an interview session are subject to public record. This includes information written in chat, on a shared document, or in email. Although interviewing may seem pretty straightforward, keep in mind that there are several legal considerations to navigate. Let's take a look at how to keep interviews legal and effective. All employment decisions will be based on an individual's relevant experience, education and training, suitability relative to a position, without regard to race, color, military status, ancestry, national origin, age, marital status, sexual orientation, political or religious affiliation, or physical or mental disability. DCBS is committed to be a reflection of the community we serve. We developed the Diversity and Inclusion Statement to uphold the Governor's affirmative action, equal opportunity employment, and diversity and inclusion principles in and of practice. Oregon State Government is committed to achieving a workforce that represents the diversity of the Oregon community and being a leader in providing its citizens with fair and equal employment opportunities. This means that even seemingly innocent personal questions or small talk can be inappropriate in an interview setting. Keep all questions focused on the applicant's job history as it relates to the open position, to ensure compliance with EEOC, state law, and policies and guidelines. If a panelist should ask an inappropriate or potentially illegal question, the facilitator should take immediate steps to mitigate the potential damage and redirect the interview. If a candidate provides information that is personal and not related to the requirement of the position, the facilitator will inform the candidate of the type of information the panel is looking for.